What goes through your mind when a bird lands in front of you? In many cases, you may just get a few short moments to look and hopefully spot a few colors or markings before it flies away. But for people who really know the birds, that brief moment is all it actually takes to get a confident ID. Not only that, but if you get really good at identification, you'll be able to recognize many birds almost instantly, whether from near or long distances, or partially obscured with absolutely no sharp details or colors, in poor lighting and with nothing but the flick of a tail, and even just by sound alone. The key factor in people who know how to fluently identify birds in this flexible way that seems almost like magic is that they have a process for learning birds in the simplest possible way, and that's what I'm going to share with you in this video. So one of the key things to know when you're first getting started with bird identification is that it's really not about memorization. A lot of people think of it as kind of like a rote memorization thing that you kind of just have to become a walking field guide. And being able to see a bird and know what it is, it's actually a skill that's a lot more like driving. You know, when you learn how to drive, there's not really that much memorization involved. It's more of a skill that you pick up from doing it and relying on the muscle memory of your body to do the actions that you want done. So bird identification is simply a skill of observation and watching and listening. If you can simply start going outside and keep your eyes peeled for opportunities to actually spend time watching birds. And when you see a bird, don't just look at it for a brief moment and then walk away. Actually spend some time to try and watch it for as long as you can. Notice where you are in relationship to that bird and maybe see if you can get a little bit closer, see if you can get a better view of it. And just start making some basic observations. Is it on the ground? Is it up in a shrub? What sorts of colors can you see? What kind of movement patterns? Is it staying very still or is it moving around and kind of always on the go? What does the beak look like? What does the tail look like? What do the wings look like? What's the overall size that you're seeing? Is this bird alone or is it with a flock? And see, these are all observations that anyone can make that don't require you to actually know what the bird is in order to start observing. But all of these little observations that you make eventually will actually give you a really solid foundation for being able to identify those birds. So as you start to spend some time on a regular basis just watching birds, very quickly you will start to notice that there are certain birds that you see over and over and over again. There are certain birds that just kind of stand out to you. They seem very abundant, or for whatever reason there's something about their appearance that just really stands out to you. And what we want to do when you're first starting to identify birds, you want to focus on the easiest and most common birds first. And this kind of flies in the face of what a lot of people try to do. They try to go out and they try to learn as many different birds as they can, and they want to try and find like the rare birds and they want to try and find the unusual birds, but it's not the best way to develop your skills when you're first starting out, because what you really need to develop your skills at this early stage is just lots of practice watching birds. And the easiest birds to watch are always going to be the most common birds that you have living right around your home. It goes so far beyond just recognizing the red breast of a robin, because you're not always going to be able to see that red breast. And if you spend a lot of time watching robins, you will be able to identify them without seeing those really obvious identification clues that are the classic telltale signs of a robin. So this is why when you get out into the field with someone who has really good bird identification skills and they're just sort of pointing them out and it's happening almost instantly and you can't really see how it's even possible for this person to be identifying these birds, it's because they've practiced and their senses are tuned up in a way that they're able to capture what's needed from a lot less information. And this starts from focusing on the easiest and most common birds first, learning them very well up close, and then as as you spend more and more time watching them, you start to see them from further and further distances away, and you start to recognize them from further and further distances away. Now, as you're doing all this, as you're getting outside and you're focusing on the birds that are easy for you to see, it's a good idea to keep a bird journal and actually have some sort of notebook where you can write down descriptions of what you're seeing to kind of jog your memory, because it's amazing how quickly you will forget what you're actually seeing. And if you're out in the field for 30 to 60 minutes, some days you might only get 2 or 3 really good sightings. And so we want to make sure that we're making the most of those opportunities. When the bird is there, you want to be present with it. You want to look at it. You want to notice everything that you can possibly observe about that bird. But after that bird leaves, you want to take a few moments to just write down, what did you observe? What did you notice about that bird? What stood out to you? Were there any colors that stood out? Were there any shapes that stood out? Were there any markings that were especially apparent? And write these things out, because the next thing that you want to do is some sort of research to follow it up. Now, there's a lot of different ways to actually do this. You can use field guides, you can go on the internet, you can actually write your descriptions and your location into like a search engine, and that will very often bring the bird up. But I just wanted to highlight some of the most common ones, and truly the first birds you learn are the hardest. And once you learn your first few birds, the next birds you learn, it starts to become easier and easier. So the first one I want to share with you is the American robin. It has this very identifiable red breast, and it's very commonly associated with human settlements because they love lawns, they love feeding around homes. And so it is very likely, if you're observing birds around your home, that you will see the robin. A lot of people ignore the robin because it's so common, but it's actually one of the best birds to help you begin to develop some of those more subtle identification skills. So robins are really some of the best birds to help you get lots of practice watching birds. Another one to pay attention for are sparrows. Sparrows are also extremely common. They often live in thickets and along the edges of shrubby areas. There are many different types of sparrows, but they're all very similar, and they are extremely common in almost every different kind of habitat. So you're very likely to encounter them in your backyard, on hikes, in parks, in wetlands. And so a lot of the birds that people might call just like a little brown bird, a lot of those birds are sparrows. And so if you can even just start by recognizing that a bird is likely to be a sparrow, that enables you to then go to the sparrow section of your field guide, and it really narrows down a lot of birds. Another one that I would recommend learning early on is the red-winged blackbird. And the red-winged blackbird stands out because they have these bright red markings on their shoulders. And in wetlands, they're often extremely easy to observe. They often hang out in groups, so you can see large flocks of red-winged blackbirds, and it makes them a lot easier to actually get your eyes on them and see them and spend some really good time watching them. So going along those same veins of very eye-catching color is the cardinal. And cardinals are a great bird to learn if you have them in your area, because they can be extremely common, and so therefore will give you lots of opportunities to spend watching them. They also have these very bright red colors, especially on the male cardinals, and that can be a good challenge for you too. As you spend time watching cardinals, you may start to tune in with the differences between the male cardinals and the female cardinals, and so that can be a really great way to help you develop your skills too. Cardinals also have the characteristic of this crown on top of their head, which makes them really stand out, and it can be a really fantastic bird. If you have this bird in your backyard, it's a great one to pay attention to, and it will teach you a lot about identification. So there's a lot more birds that we could include in this list, but the main thing to remember is to focus on the easiest and most common birds first. As you start to notice that you're able to identify them from further and further distances away, that's a sign that your identification skills are improving and you're going to be setting yourself up to learn some of the more rare birds. And as you start getting out, most of your experiences are going to be with the same birds over and over again. And that's good because it gives you that reinforcement. It helps you really integrate and update the images that you have in your mind. As you do this, as you spend this time with these birds over and over again, and you get better and better at recognizing them from further distances away, you will also start to have experiences with less common birds. There will be birds that you start to see less often, but you will start to have repeated encounters with them as well. And as you continue having repeated encounters with more and more birds, you will start to move further out in terms of how far you're able to identify birds from and how easily you're able to identify birds, until most of the birds that you see on a walk, you will be able to identify them with just a very brief glance. So your challenge now is to get outside and find some birds and just spend time watching them. That's really all it takes to start identifying birds. So I hope you have fun out there. Let me know what you discover. I hope you found this interesting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.